listening to what you've said, is it a correct interpretation that you're like hosting a show at Sirius? Is that finding the digital version of the cheap FM station and curating? Is that like you adapting to the digital era, or how to say it? Or
it's my work on the radio, whether it's this show, The Writer's Block, where I curate the music, interviews, and let the artists actually DJ and pick music for the show, or if I'm doing just a regular DJ stint on other channels, or doing specials or interviews or live broadcasts. It's journalism on the air. Everything I do as a writer, I'm doing on the radio. One of the executive that hired me, one of the things he said is like, look, we can get lots of people who have experience in radio. You have a radio voice, but you also have experience as a writer and an interviewer, and you can bring a dimension to that forum that you can always use more of. So I look at it as journalism in the moment. When I'm interviewing somebody on my program, I'm doing the same thing with them that I would do if I was writing a piece for them writing a piece on them for Mojo or Rolling Stone. It's the same work in a different medium. And yes, it is more digital. You can hear my interviews with artists using the app on the phone.
Yeah, but I was thinking, it sounded like when you were talking about how the music industry and big artists, they are like surrounded by gatekeepers. Yeah. Is this a way to create the good kind of accessibility and curating to?
Yeah.
I don't know if this is blunt, but it seems like you're finding a way to do the same line of work which you feel is important, but when because the digital era and the consequences of that has blocked certain ways of expression in journalism.
Well, it's not just the digital era, but these changes have been
maybe corporate changes.
They're corporate. They're the way people manage their careers. It's the way people look at branding themselves, one of my least favorite words in the English language. I simply do what I do in whatever setting, forum, opportunity I have. Like I said before, I adapt, but I don't compromise. I have to adapt to certain changes, but that doesn't mean I have to compromise the ideals of the work itself. The way I use language, the way I prepare for an interview, the kind of questions that I want to bring out. I may just have an hour on the air each week with a particular artist, but I'm going to get the most out of that hour. And the questions and the conversation that we have are going to bring up stories and ideas that probably would not come up in a conversation that he had with somebody else. That's my job, to bring you the thing that you haven't heard yet, and to have the artist maybe come up with a revelation that even they haven't thought about because they weren't asked that question in a particular way. I'll give you an example. This isn't radio oriented, but it's the same concept. I was interviewing Billy Corgan of Smashing Pumpkins for a major interview feature in Rolling Stone in 1995. It was for the Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness record. It was a career respective interview up to that point, a major cover. And at one point, I said to Billy, Billy, you've talked about this before. You talked about your experiences in therapy as a teenager and a young man. And I wanted to ask you about that. And he said, look, man, I've been talking about this forever. People constantly ask me about it. I'm kind of tired of it. And I said, well, actually, I didn't want to ask you about the therapy itself. I wanted to ask you what music did for you that therapy did not. And that was 20 minutes right there. And it's not that I'm like a genius that I thought of this, but it was something that I was genuinely curious about and I thought was worth bringing up because he had talked about the therapy before. And it was clearly in the songwriting, and it was clearly in the way he saw himself as a musician and as a band leader and a creator. But my notion is, well, what did music do for you that therapy did not? Because I know what music does for me. I've never had to be in therapy, but I know that when I need music, it's there for me, and it gives me the thing that I need to keep going. And that was something that we could both relate to, and it was a question that brought out a response that was really, I think, valuable. Might have been valuable to him. It was certainly valuable to me, and I think it really enriched the story.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the kind of interviews I like, at least, and yeah, good example. But so we've talked about some negative stuff.
Yeah, let's get positive.
Too. Yeah, no, I was actually I want to bring
I'm not
it
a
a
negative
bit
guy.
a notch. I want to bring it to a notch more of negativity before we start going back up.
All right, let's get darker.
Yeah, so like, since you have had a life in music, when has there been a time that you've been close to saying like, fuck this, I'm done with music? Or has there been a time, or like when you doubted, like, why did I love music, but why did I get into this?
Well, I can answer that in one word: never. I have never doubted that choice. It was the only choice I wanted to make. It's not like I had a lot of other options. There may have been options open to me. I wasn't interested in any of them. I wanted to be around music. I loved it. I wanted to know more about it. I wanted to experience as much as I could. I wanted to find out how it was made, what it took, what are the motivations, which is a lot of what the interview process is. You're trying to divine people's motivations and their work ethic, the actual labor. As Patty says, it's work. I've never doubted it. Never, ever. And I never doubted the choice of work that was involved. I didn't look and go, oh man, I wish I could have been a musician. I probably could have worked at that. I probably could have done okay. I'm not a great businessman, so I'm not sure that was really my forte. At one point I thought, man, I'd love to be an A&R guy, because then you're there as part of the creative process. But a manager, a very good friend of mine, said, you would have been miserable as an A&R guy, because you would have signed stuff that you really loved. And if it didn't sell, you'd get all the blame for it. And if it did sell, you'd get none of the credit. So you're better off. Yeah. And in fact, as he pointed out, what I do is A&R in itself, because I'm there bringing things forward that might not necessarily be brought forward in the normal course of record company, music business, industry procedure, because I'm not in the music business, because I don't make money from music. I make money from my work. I make a living.
But isn't your work music work?
Of course
you can say
yes,
it's writing,
but I'm not in the business of making money from music. I'm a writer. I get paid for writing. I'm a journalist.
But if there wasn't music, what would you write about?
If there wasn't music, I'm not sure I'd be a writer at all, because that's what I want to write about. It seems like I'm making a very fine point here.
Or maybe I'm splitting hairs too.
Well, I think there's two answers to the same question. You could say, yes, I'm in the music business because we're sitting here talking about music and the business of music. I'm here for a conference and a festival, and there are people from the music business who are actually in promotion, booking, A&R, digital media, etc. I go to concerts, which are part of the music business. I buy records, which are the lingua franca of the music business. But I don't make money from record sales. My income is not dependent on how well a record does or how well it doesn't do, which actually makes me, I think, a lot more free in my judgments. I'm not here telling you what's going to be big. I'm hopefully telling you what's important, or what's important to me. or what might be important to you. And it might be big. It's like I said, I interview musicians. Some of them happen to be stars, but they're always musicians first. So in a sense, what happens in the music business, you know, I have to deal with the changes, but I don't have to. It is kind of a fine point, but I like to think of myself as being pretty diligently independent from many of those concerns. Not because I have an attitude about it, but I think it's important in my work. You know, I want to be able to make the judgments that matter. At the same time, I can describe and report on the music business. It's just that my livelihood is not dependent on it. My livelihood is dependent on writing a good piece and getting it published. I'm in the publishing business.
So this brings me to, I prepared some questions. Like in the beginning, I asked you, what is music? And then I guess like the obvious follow-up question would be, what is music journalism? Because you sort of got into that in your answer now, that you said that you're there to bring out.
I report.
To bring out the things that are in music that the artist doesn't directly express, or the record label, that you're somehow a part of a system.
Well, I'm hoping to build on all of this thought and commitment and activity, and bring a dimension out that maybe hasn't come out already, or to come at it from a different place or a different perspective. Other writers will, you know, report on the same subject and they'll have an entirely different take on it. That's the beauty of free speech. That's the beauty of having multiple publications. I wish there were more of them. Publishing has taken a big hit. You know, I'm freelance now myself. I'm okay with that. I know it's harder for a lot of other writers. But I sort of lost track of what you asked.
What music journalism is like to society and to music, and because I mean
it's like
music,
any other journalism. It's just telling the truth. The truth as you've seen it, as you've experienced it, and that you've been honest with that truth. I've never written anything that I wanted to take back. And if I did make a mistake, not even a mistake, but if I made a judgment that maybe was a little hasty, I'd call myself on it.
Since the opportunities to go into music journalism today
they're much tighter.
Than before. And I know, like, a lot of interviews I've read and seen is, like you said, that the access to artists is more restricted, and everything's more like
it's more circumscribed.
And also that things sometimes aren't allowed to take time. So you can see an interview that's like, describe what your new record sounds like, and then
that's not an interview.
No, exactly, and you go like.
Well, it's like that's also an example that. Okay.
So let me just.
Okay, you finished.
You know, you could say that is music journalism, but you could also say that this is just half-assed PR. And so
there's good music journalism and bad music journalism.
So that was my question. Like maybe if you could take us through like what you see, like for a young person going into music journalism today, what can you say with your like experience going from like how it was to where it is now, and also what music journalism is or is not. You know, elaborate.
I'll tell you what music journalism is not. You know, I'll sort of boil it down to one thing. It's just like, you know, tell me about your new album. That's not a question. Okay, that's not, and there's no work involved in that. There's no preparation. Music journalism, like any kind of journalism, it requires preparation, it requires research, it requires thinking about what you can do in the time that you have to do it. Even when I started working at Rolling Stone, I got my first stories there in like 77. My first cover story was in 1985. Even by then, people who had worked there before me were going, oh, well, the golden days are over. They were telling me it was over when I showed up. And in fact, that wasn't the case. It was simply making the best of the opportunities and the advantages that you had. And certainly I had advantages that a lot of other publications did not. I was able to go on the road for extended periods, to have multiple sessions with artists that could go for a couple of hours apiece. But even as that changes, the basic things that you need to do never change, which is be prepared. Go in there with, a good idea of what you want to try and accomplish in the time that you have, even if there are these other restrictions like time and setting and, there's 4 other people coming in after you. Think about the story you want to tell ahead of time. Listen to the music before you go in. Listen to as much of it as you can. It's all online, so you can't say, well, I don't have the record. Just do it. If you're prepared, then you're going to have good ideas when you go in. And when you're in there, be attentive to what is being said. You're not simply there to ask a question. A lot of what comes out of a good interview, regardless of how long or short it is how you deal with the follow-up. I always like to think that when I go in and do an interview, I'm working with multiple sides of my brain. There's the part that asks the question. There's the part that's listening to the answer. There's the part that's listening to what's not in the answer, like what is still in there that I can draw out. And I'm also listening for where this can go that maybe I haven't planned for. Like maybe there's a digression that can really bring something out. And even if I'm just talking to somebody for a half hour, you can get a lot done in a half hour if you're prepared. It's no different than if a reporter is covering a fire or a trial or interviewing a politician. They're going in with as much knowledge as they have in order to bring back more knowledge. My basic thing is I walk in, I want to find out the thing I don't know yet. If you go in trying to basically tell a story that you've already written, you shouldn't be there. Just write it as an essay. That's not reporting. I think that the basic tenets of journalism are always there, regardless of the subject, regardless of the setting, and regardless of whatever limitations somebody wants to put on it. And one thing that you will often find, if you do all that, in spite of everything that you've been told that you can or shouldn't do, you'll often find that the artists, the person that you talk to directly, will respond in a way that is a lot freer and more engaged. If it's somebody who's practiced in the art of celebrity, that probably won't happen because they've got a message and they're going to stick to it. But I would say that in the case of musicians, and again, I'm not talking about, I don't interview celebrities, I interview musicians. Musicians love talking about music, and they're as excited to hear what you think as you are about what they think. A lot of my best discussions and interviews have come out of just exchanging enthusiasms with musicians about records they're listening to, and oh, did you hear this thing? And oh, I went to see so-and-so, and that song that he performed, that gave me some idea about something I can do. And it's the same kind of discussion you're going to have with somebody in a record store. You're just having it in a more formal setting, to create a more formal result. But the same energies and the same enthusiasms and personal experiences, they all apply.
So if you take that and keep that in mind, and what you said about the golden days, are they still ahead? Or was it in fact you?
Every day that I get a new day is a golden day.
No, but looking at it from a fresh out of journalism school or whatever, like you said that everybody
create your own golden day.
Okay.
The golden days aren't created for you. If I had walked into Rolling Stone and they said, "Oh, the golden days are," I thought, "Oh, great! I might as well just go home." But I didn't go home because I knew that where I was a genuinely exciting place to be. I've got my first issue of Rolling Stone in the fall of 1968. I was a subscriber starting in late 1968. So I was reading the magazine religiously every 2 weeks for almost 10 years before I got my first story published there. I knew how the job was done. And I knew how they were evolving as a publication, how the reporting and the language, the formatting, the presentation, all of those things evolved over time as the music, as the industry evolved, as publishing evolved. So I saw all of that. And as far as I was concerned, when I got there, it was my chance to learn from it, learn from having those advantages of being there, and to develop my own voice and contribute to the voice of that publication. So as far as I was concerned, the golden days, they were just starting for me, because this was my chance to show if I had anything. And the more I did it, the more I realized that you make your own golden day every day. It's when you just sit back and cruise, that's when the golden days are over. I would like to think that any young writers, any young broadcasters, whether you're in a digital medium, whether you've got a website, if you have a blog, if you do some YouTube thing or whatever, or if you're actually in print, whatever print form becomes. I would like to think that when I pick up your magazine or I see your thing online, I'm going to learn something from it. I don't know everything. I'd like to, and I don't stop. I'm an avid reader. I still subscribe to music magazines.
So what media outlets do you use to
magazines, radio. I look at certain websites, not religiously, because typically I start my day at about 9 a.m. at the computer. I'm writing, and I'm going pretty much the rest of the day, unless I'm going out for an interview or I have to go to the studio for a taping at Sirius, or I'm going to a gig, or I'm, say, here in Gothenburg. But I read music magazines. I do read digital publications. I listen to the radio a lot. I don't listen to a lot of podcasts, not because I'm uninterested in them, but there's so many of them. And I'd rather listen to records. And to me, listening to the music, listening to records, listening to things online, listening to live performances that I get access to, that's all part of research. It's a pleasure. I love listening to music, but everything I do hopefully feeds into the next thing I do. And even if I'm going back and listening to classic records that I really love, or collector's items that I have, or great live tapes that I've got of Springsteen or the Stones from back in the day. A lot of times you listen to that and it brings up an idea that maybe you haven't had before, or something you forgot about, so that when you reapproach that subject, you're coming at it with additional knowledge from that additional exposure. You don't learn everything about an artist or record or performance the first time you hear it. You know, you can be genuinely amazed, you can be transformed, but a lot of what you learn comes from additional exposure because you hear the depth. You hear that thing you didn't hear the first time. And sometimes that thing you hear the second, third, fourth time around is the thing that really crystallizes it for you. So constantly being exposed to music means you're in a constant learning, you're on a constant learning curve.
Yeah, I was discussing that the other day with a friend, the kind of exposure you get to music, because in my car I have a CD player, and we're talking about how when we were younger you'd like get together a bunch of friends to order records from mail order, and then you had to like decide, judging from the description in the catalog, and then it arrived and you put it on first time, it's like, it's nothing like they said in the catalog. but then you go like, okay, so I paid my hard-earned money for this. Like, okay, I guess I better give it another listen, and then, okay, yeah, well, maybe it was not so bad. You play the other record 5 times, but then that one again. And then, like, after a time, like you said, like something crystallizes. And today I find myself, like, I use digital listening a lot, and I find myself not going back to, because like you said, the total accessibility and what do you think happens with I don't know, like the music listener or the musician, or is like just elaborate on that thing, like where do you see this going with the?
If I knew where all this was going, I'd probably be a lot richer than I am.
Yeah.
I don't know where it's going. It's always been kind of the Wild West, because, you know, people were talking about how the music business was changing in the 70s. You know, disco comes in, rock is dead. Well, if I had a nickel for every time somebody told me rock was dead, I would be a richer man. Music, as long as people are making music, it's always there. And there's so much recorded music that it will always be there. But it's the music that gets made next that determines who we are and what we have to say and what we want to achieve as a society, as people, as in democracies, in just society. Whether it's streaming or digital, that's just distribution. But that's not the experience. The experience is something that you take into yourself and then bring back out. You know, all of this other stuff is just the tools. It's the technology. And I think it's very easy to be distracted by the technology, because that's what people want to sell you. You know, that's about commerce. Buy the new phone. You know, get 5G, whatever the fuck it is. I don't know what. But you know, I'm. To me, if I knock wood, if suddenly, you know, there was no electricity in the world, and I couldn't play records, I couldn't listen to anything on my phone, my CD player didn't work, there is still music, because someone can sing. Someone will find a way to create a noise that has expressive power. There will always be music. And it may be that we've got to go back to the, you know, ultra basics to really find ourselves again. But I'm not worried about music. Music will always be there. It's whether we have if we have what it takes to make it. And I'm pretty confident that when I get up again tomorrow morning, there'll be something new for me to listen to, and something new for me to learn from, and maybe something to write about and talk about on the radio. I get up every day figuring that's what's going to happen. And I'm rarely disappointed.
The time frame for being exposed to music, and also that goes for journalism, like the time frame, like the time, the constant of time is affecting both music journalism and how you're exposed to music. And do you think that will, in a longer sense, affect how musicians create music, or how journalists?
You mean in terms of how much time we spend with music?
And how much time you have to do an interview? Like, is there good 5-minute pieces, or like what's social media, like 3.5 minutes?
If you ask the right question, you can get a lot in 5 minutes. I think that.
But is that how you want your music journalism?
That's not how I want to experience it, but I go back to that thing. I have to adapt because things around me are changing over which I have no control. But that doesn't mean I compromise the ideals by which I act.
So let's say, sorry for interrupting, but let's say I'm a music journalist that I want to write lengthy pieces on music. I just have to adapt to the circumstances then to make sure that
part of that adapting is finding the outlets and really the like-minded souls that want to be a part of this with you. One of the things that people sort of forget about a magazine like Rolling Stone is that before November of 1967, the concept of the Rolling Stone interview did not exist because there was no Rolling Stone. Rock journalism in 1967 was still a very young business. The first rock magazine of that sort was only first published in 1966. It was called Crawdaddy. And it was published by a 17-year-old student at Swarthmore College outside Philadelphia named Paul Williams, who I would say is the genuine father of rock journalism and rock criticism. He published Crawdaddy as a mimeograph sheet in his dormitory. He was 17 years old. Sadly, he died a number of years ago. He never got rich. He went off and did other things, but he did it strictly for the motivation and the passion for music. Rolling Stone was founded in the same way. Jan Wenner, who at the time was only 21, and Ralph Gleason, who was an older, more experienced writer. He was a columnist at the San Francisco Chronicle. They started the magazine the first issue was November of 1967. There was nothing else like it. With the news reporting, the reviews, the feature presentations, it was one of a kind. So at that point, before that thing really came into existence, nobody knew what that was going to be. Like, what is rock journalism? It didn't exist. So whatever the next form is, it's got to be invented. And that's what the next wave, the next generations, that's what they do. Just as Paul Williams and Jan invented theirs, you make your own destiny, or you get a chance to be a part of one that's in motion. I got a chance to be a part of one that was in motion and got an opportunity to add to it and to build on what had already been created and give it hopefully life, perspective, and posterity so that the next phase could then take over. I don't want it to stop with me. That would be pointless. That's wasted work. You want it to carry on, and you want the work that you've done to endure so that there's inspiration for people to find their own way forward. I can't actually tell you what the next way is because I'm busy working on my own. But if you want to do it badly enough, you find a way. That's how all the great bands started. If you want to just get back down to that, they found a way to do something that wasn't being done. They had to do it themselves. That's what all of that DIY culture is about. Do it yourself because it's not being done yet. And when you do it yourself, you inspire others to do likewise, or you inspire others to get on board. And maybe you do it together. Maybe you do it in parallel. Maybe you go on different tracks. Maybe you do it in hip hop and jazz, or, you know, experimental music, who knows what. You know, it just comes back to that same thing. I'm trying to find out the thing I don't know yet. And to me, that's ultimately what everything that I've been doing has been based on. I want to know the thing I don't know yet. And I also am very, as a writer and being in radio and someone who's trying to hopefully advocate for things, you know, I'm not even worried about being first. I don't want to be the first guy to do it. I just want to be right. I just want to feel like I've made the right choice and backed the right horse. And I've been lucky enough to do that more often than not. And even if it didn't turn out that, you know, the things that I really wanted to see go forward, you know, maybe they didn't go all the way, or the artist made a different choice, or they just went on to a different part of the lifestyle. The fact that I had a part in it for as long as it ran, I can take a lot of pride and pleasure out of that. And I'm really glad when I see other people do it and carry it forward, because, you know, they're going to find out something I don't know yet, and then they're going to pass it back to me. And I'll be really grateful for it.